Welcome to another instructional video to benefit Eve University. My name is Amoni Panala, my pronouns are she, her, and this video is part of a series of classes that I normally teach or could teach at Eve University. I frequently get asked, will there be a recording of this class? And my answer is always no. I never want to make people uncomfortable by recording the class, especially since I want to encourage people to ask questions that maybe they feel silly for asking. Eve University encourages people to ask those questions just to get them out of the way. Otherwise, problems ensue when people don't ask those questions. So, today we are going to be looking at EWAR, or electronic warfare. So in this class, we will talk about what EWAR is, what kinds of EWAR there are, the skills you can train to improve your EWAR performance, how to counter EWAR. We'll talk about some ships you can fly as a new player, and we will talk about drones, and we will talk about some fleet tactics, and there will be no question and answer since there is no live class participating in this, but if you do have questions, you can leave them as a comment and I will try to get to as many of them as I can. I can't promise to get all of them, but I will try to answer as many as possible. What is EWAR? EWAR stands for electronic warfare. It is a support role in a sense, but it is crucial for many fights that there be EWAR on grid, whether it's a dedicated EWAR wing and a dedicated EWAR squad, or just someone willing to fly an EWAR ship. You can also fit individual modules of EWAR on ships that otherwise are not considered EWAR ships. The goal of EWAR is to disrupt, or to delay, or deny, or neutralize, right? There's all kinds of action verbs that you can use to describe the role of EWAR. And I kid you not, it can be the difference between winning and losing a fight. It is that important. Each empire, each of the 4 empires have their own specialty. Caldari is ECM, or electric countermeasures. Most people just refer to it as jams or jamming. Amar is weapon disruption, but also arguably neuts or neutralizers, energy neutralizers. Galente is remote sensor dampeners, and Minimatar is target painting, also known as paints. So, Caldari. When you use electronic countermeasures, or ECM, jams, you are effectively blocking another ship's targeting computers. You are, or not targeting computers, but more like they're locking computers. I guess that is targeting. But essentially what happens is you activate these modules on an enemy ship and it can no longer lock on to other ships. So we have an example here of a ship that's being jammed. That ship can no longer lock on to any targets, and this is a huge game changer in a fight, because if I am the primary damage dealer in a fight, if I happen to be the one that's doing the most damage, whether it's because of the ship that I'm using or I have higher skills than the other people who are flying alongside me, and I am doing the most damage output, if somebody brings electronic countermeasures, if somebody brings jams and then jams me out, well, now they've just eliminated me as a threat on grid. Jams work on a percentage to succeed versus the opponent's resistance. Every ship has a particular strength that it gets a bonus to, plus the pilot's skills trained in resistance to electronic countermeasures. For the EWAR, it's going to be radar. For the Minmatar, it's going to be LADAR, Caldari, gravimetric, Galente, magnetometric. There is also multispectral, which does not get as strong of an output in terms of how likely are you to jam. It's still possible. It's just not going to perform as well as a Empire-specific jam. And you don't have to try and memorize radar, LADAR, gravimetric, magnetometric. Folks just say yellow, red, blue, green. Don't feel like you have to try and scribble that down somewhere and memorize it. Folks just say the color, or they say the um, the Empire faction. It is important to know, Amar is yellow, Mumatar is red, Kildari is blue, Galente is green, or in this case, teal, right? Magnetometric is teal. For some reason, they didn't use like a darker green that looks more like what we associate with Galente ships, but whatever. The Amar specialize in weapon disruption. Weapon disruption reduces the range and damage application. So effectively what is happening here is tracking disruption is going to reduce how far out your guns can shoot. It's also going to make your guns move, like not be able to track a target as well. As for, and that's going to be for all your turrets, your projectiles, your hybrids, your um, your energy weapons, right? But then you've also got missile systems, and there's a whole separate weapon disruption for missiles called guidance disruption. And those are going to reduce the missile flight time, right? So what's your range effectively, right? What is the range that your missiles go out to? And your explosion radius, right? How much of an impact do your missiles do when they actually hit? Um, Tracking disruption does have a range that is limited. Once you hit that limit, you're going to see decreasing returns to the point where eventually it doesn't even work. Um, One of the benefits of weapon disruption is that you can put scripts in them, which is going to essentially be a trade-off. You put in a script let's say a range script. Okay, now you are specifically disrupting range, right? So you know that when you put that in, you know that your enemy that you're using this weapon disruption on is going to have a significantly decreased range. You could also put in an accuracy script and you're going to get the same thing with accuracy. You know that when they're disrupted, they're going to have a lot harder time just hitting targets. Galente, their specialty is remote sensor dampening, damps. Um, damps are great. I think when I first got into EWAR, I severely underestimated the usefulness of damps. Upon flying more EWAR in different scenarios, I find myself going for damps as a viable option more often than I go for jams, which was my previous favorite. Um, and essentially what they do is they it's like putting fog in front of your um, targeting computer, right? You're making it so that the targeting computer cannot lock on as far. Um, so normally a ship has a certain distance out to which it can lock onto a target. Or it can affect the targeting speed, which, you know, you click on and lock onto a target and you hear that little sound and it has the little circle with the timer that indicates how long it's going to take before it locks onto the target, right? If you damp somebody using targeting speed, affecting their scan resolution, it is going to take significantly longer for them to lock on to a target. And if they can't lock on, they can't shoot you. Um, as with weapon disruption, you can put in scripts which are going to impact their the range or the scan resolution. If you don't put in a script, you can still do both. It's just going to not have the same efficacy as if you put in a script, right? So that's the trade-off. You can do both, but using scripts is far more effective. And that's why people do it, right? As with weapon disruption, there is a fall off range at which uh, you aren't going to get any real result from trying to damp people. And the Minotaurs specialize in target painting. Now, I know my presentation gives you the abbreviation TP. Nobody uses that. That's stupid. Um, I'm not trying to be rude here, but like the jokes, the middle school jokes, TP would just never cease if we actually called it that. Most people just refer to it as paints. Um, so, what do paints do? They basically make your ship look bigger, or make a ship look bigger than it actually is on the targeting computer. And if it looks that big on the targeting computer, that makes it easier to lock onto, makes it easier to apply damage with things like missiles, right? This is particularly useful on things like frigates, right? And destroyers. Battleships are going to have a hard time applying to small ships, so it helps to be able to make their signature radius, right? That's It's the term that we use to describe the way a ship appears to a targeting computer. So paints make your signature radius balloon bigger and bigger. Most helpful on small ships, but you know, if you have paints, use them, right? Even if you are putting them on a battleship or whatever. Um, and the same thing, right, with all the others, right? There is an effective range at which they stop working. Now, in my experience, paints have a pretty generous range. Um, so, you're depending on what your target painting skill is at, you're going to get, you know, some pretty generous range. It's something that you can do from far away. It is the most often way I see this used is ships that are performing support roles will sometimes fit paints on their ship so that they can get on kill mails. This might be a logi, this might be um, a fuel truck or something like that, sticking a target painter on there so they can get on the kill mail, and it has some utility. Now there are a bunch of ship skills that you can train, um, but obviously, train your Magic 14, right? Um, T1 frigates are probably not going to be super hard to get into and fit, but I will tell you that the further along you get in EWAR and the more advanced you get trying to use EWAR, you're going to run into fitting issues because electronic warfare can take up a lot of ship resources. So training up your Magic 14, which is all your sort of support skills that apply across all ships, train those up, train up your command skills. So, if you are going to fly EWAR frigates, make sure you're training up the particular empire that you are going to fly. If you're going to do jams, train up your Caldari frigate skills, right? Um, once you get into T2, you're going to find, you're going to have your Caldari frigate 5, and then you're going to train electronic attack frigates, right? But train up those individual empire skills depending on whatever ship size you're flying. For the Caldari, right, you're going to want to train long distance jamming and frequency modulation as basics, right? These are going to improve your optimal. This is going to improve your fall off. These two things are going to make a huge difference in terms of your output. If you are a member of Eve University, you have probably seen griffins before, right? This is how you get started seeing better results from your griffins, right? You can further train electronic warfare, which is going to reduce the capacitor that's needed for your jams. You can also train signal dispersion, which is going to improve the strength of your ECM, right? It's going to improve the strength of your jams. Um, Now, there are prerequisites, right? So your electronic warfare skill is going to be the skill that you need to train up. You need it to at least 4 to train all of these. all of the Caldari related ones. Once you get to warp disruption, also be training weapon destabilization. Um, you're going to need weapon disruption 4, but what that gives you is you're going to reduce the amount of capacitor that you need for weapon disruption modules, and then you're also going to increase the strength of weapon disruption modules as well. For Galente, you want sensor linking and signal suppression, right? Same deal here. Reducing the capacitor need for your damps and increasing the effectiveness of your damps. Same thing with target painting and signature focusing. Reduces cap, increases the strength, right, of your paints. Um, do pay attention to those prerequisites. They are going to matter. Um, you're going to have a bad time if you buy a bunch of skill books and then realize, oh, I have to train up the prerequisites first, and then I can train into these to these strength enhancing skills, right? So do be aware of that. Um, again, these skills are going to give you a better performance. EVE University folks, like, we use Griffins on the regular. It may be worth training your electronic warfare, your long distance jamming, your frequency modulation, right? If you are interested in seeing better performance from Griffins, right? Um, train these skills, and if you're like, you know what, I want to get, I want to fly EWAR more regularly, not just because it's what I can fly, but because I'm genuinely interested in being able to perform this role in the fleet, start looking at training some of the other Empire specific skills, right? So that you can increase your versatility and your ability to provide different types of EWAR support. Now, there are a number of ways to counter EWAR. For jams, that's going to be your sensor boosters with ECCM or electric countermeasures, uh, counter something something. Anyway, ECCM script is the one that you want. Um, it effectively makes the jams not work as reliably. Uh, you can also train your signal amplifier and your sensor compensation skills um, with weapon disruption. You can use a tracking computer, either with tracking or range script. Um, you are going to want to train up your and we're going to start this over again. Okay, so there are a few different tools at your disposal for countering EWAR. It's a mix of modules and skills that you can train. For jams, that's going to be your sensor booster with an ECCM script, right? Train up your sensor compensation skills. You can use a signal amplifier. Weapon disruption, that's going to be your tracking computer with either a tracking or a range script. Um, Same thing with missiles. You're going to need a missile guidance computer with either precision or range script, depending on how you are being uh, guidance disrupted, right? With damps, that's going to be a sensor booster with either resolution or range script. With paints, not so much a counter as being aware that if you are target painted, your signature radius is going to be a lot higher, and therefore you are going to need to be strategic about when you activate your micro warp drive, because activating your micro warp drive is the #1 way that people cause their signature radius to explode, right? Micro warp drives cause what is called signature bloom. It's a significant increase in your signature radius. If you activate your micro warp drive while you have paints on you, you are effectively, doing the ultimate gamer thing and numbers go up, right? So, um, not really a hard counter to paints, but do be aware of it, right? If you are dual prop fit with with an afterburner, use your afterburner. Don't use your micro warp drive. All right, so these are your starting ships. You have the Griffin, the Crucifier, the Maulus, and the Vigil. Um, these ships are fragile, I want to say, right off the bat. And even once you get into the T2 versions, right, they are still fragile. These are frigates, keep in mind. They're great ships, and they can make a huge difference even at the T1 level. But it is important to realize that they are very fragile. And so, because they can make such a huge difference on grid, you are going to need to be aware that people will target you first. So in some ways, EWAR is one of the hardest things to start learning because people will want to get rid of you first. So if you're a new player and somebody puts you in a Griffin, don't feel bad if you lose the ship right away. It's not because you did something wrong. It's because they understand that your ship could really ruin their day. And they want to make sure that you don't do that. It may help to practice manual piloting, to learn how to keep your transversal up so that you don't get hit as often. And in frigates, you're going to be extremely mobile. You're going to be able to get around the grid, around the fight, relatively easy. You're going to be zooming around. But be aware that these ships are going to be targeted first very often, and they are going to die very fast because they are so fragile. Now, there are EWAR drones, and I will say right at the top, I don't really see people using anything other than EC drones. Um, you might find use cases for these other drones, but most often what I see is EC drones or ECMs. Um, the reason for this is that the most common way these are deployed is in escaping or in temporarily disrupting uh, your opponent in a fight when you otherwise may not be using EWAR this way, right? So EC drones will occasionally land a jam on your opponent. You might use this to run away, right? If you're being ganked by someone and you deploy EC drones, you might get one jam off, and now warp disruptor or their warp scrambler is no longer on you and you can warp away. In other cases, it might just be uh, you have a flight of EC drones in your drone bay and you deploy those and you stop the spool of some Kikis or a Vedmak or Drekovac, whatever the case may be. Even just getting one jam off on those Dracolavian ships means that their damage is significantly reduced because these ships, their weapon systems spool, meaning that the damage starts relatively low, fairly low, and then increases over time. If you interrupt that with ECM drones, now they have to start all the way back at the beginning with low damage. So it can be a huge deal. But I don't see a lot of tracking disruption, sensor damps, or paints. I don't see those drones deployed a lot. I know there are some ships that give bonuses to these kinds of drones, and maybe that might be a case for trying to use these drones. But by by and large, your ECMs are going to be the ones that you're going to see most often. So as I said, EWAR ships are fragile. Now, the benefit is that um, they generally have quite a generous optimal and fall-off range, which means that while the rest of the fleet, particularly in brawling scenarios, right, you have fleets going head to head with each other, getting all up close and personal, your E-warship doesn't have to get up close and personal. You can stay back. You can burn away from the rest of the fleet and keep away at, say, 50 or, whatever, depending on your optimal and fall off. As members of EVE University, we understand this is a learning corp, and your squad commander, your EWAR squad commander, or the FC is going to ask about what what your optimal, what your fall off range is. Uh, don't feel bad if it's not as good as someone else. Someone else might be training to be, you know, the person who does EWAR most often. Um, but just be aware that as a general rule, you're gonna want to pull away from the rest of the fleet. Um, that also means that these are a great option for nano, where you're already pulling range on your opponent, um, and this just makes EWAR can make that even that much more effective because you're already so far away. You're gonna stick right with your buddies. Your squad commander is probably going to have you exempt yourself from warps, or you're going to warp separately from the rest of the fleet because in a brawling comp, right? The in the fights where you get right up in each other's faces to fight, you do not want to be anywhere near that. So your squad commander or the FC is going to tell you, exempt yourself from fleet warps. You're going to warp at your optimal. So if your optimal range is 50, you're going to warp to the fight. You're going to warp to the target at 50, not 0, like everybody else. Be aware that who you target is quite likely going to be different from the primary target. This is something the FC will tell you or your squad commander will determine based on their understanding of the fight or something the FC has told them. Um, Oftentimes, what you are doing is you are like with jams, you are jamming um, you're jamming the enemy logi, right? Because if you can prevent logi from repping, then that gives your fleet just an immense advantage over the enemy. You can start breaking things that wouldn't otherwise break, right? Under reps. You might be jamming Triglavian ships to reduce their damage output. Um, you might also be using jams for things like crowbarring, right? Which is essentially you're breaking the lock on tackle ships. So this could be a slasher, Condor, Punisher. At the T2 level, you're going to have your interceptors, the Malediction, the um, the Ramjag, things like that, the Jaguar, right? These are going to be things that you might use your jams for. With damps, it's going to oftentimes be your heavy hitters that you're going to be damping. So that could be in bigger fights, that could be something like the um, Marauders on grid. Gonna damp those out because if they can't hit out very far, then they're kind of just wet noodles. Um, with paints, it's going to be, your small ships, right? The small, fast things, all the kitey small things that you need to target paint. And of course, be aware that even if there is no ship coming after you, they may deploy drones to come after you. Um, your ships are fragile enough that drones may be all that's necessary to wipe you out. Uh, Occasionally, you might see, a malediction coming for you or a jaguar coming for you. Um, be aware of those things because you are going to be um, very annoying to the enemy and they are going to want to take you out. If you can, stay aligned to something. As a general rule, you're going to want to stay aligned if possible. Or at the very least, you're going to want to keep moving. Because if you're moving, you're harder to shoot. When you get yellow boxed or red boxed, preferably when you're yellow boxed, pay attention. Start thinking about where am I going to warp out and then warp there. Warp off. You can always come back if you need to, but it's better that you stay alive and warp off early and then come back than trying to warp off while you're getting shot, because chances are you will pop. If you are part of a squad or even a full wing of EWAR, be sure that you don't bunch up. If you bunch up, you are going to be like fish in a barrel. And make sure that before you warp off that you drop a bookmark so that you can warp back to the spot you were at, especially if you are in a really good perch overlooking the battle. You want to make sure that you can get back to that spot. So, this is just the basics of EWAR. There are so many details that we could get into, including T2 ships, advanced skills, things like that that we could talk about. But this is just the overview. Hopefully, it gives you an idea of how EWAR can be a huge force multiplier in terms of fleet fights as well as small gang, nano fights, things like that. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when the next video comes out. I am trying to get all the classes done so that people can go to them and refer to them. Otherwise, I wish you all the best. Fly safe, everyone.